To the chagrin of my loved ones, I am not much of a shopper. But even I know that Black Friday is next Friday, except it already started this Friday or last Friday with sales and cyber deals and deep discounts everywhere. I do take some comfort in knowing that our ancestor Abraham also seems to lack the skillful shopper gene. This week in Parshat Chayei Sarah, Abraham makes the first Israelite land purchase in Canaan, obtaining the cave of Machpelah as a burial plot for his wife Sarah. But no bargain shopper is he. Abraham offers up front the full retail price. No discount codes, no coupons, no minute after midnight shopping strategy. He opens his non-negotiation with Ephron the Hittite in Genesis 23:9 by saying, "Bechesef malei yitnena li," let him sell it to me at full price. Shocking, I know. And even more shocking, given what we know preceded it, what we read 2 weeks ago in Parshat Lech Lecha, God's permanent promise of this very land to Abraham. I assign the land you sojourn in to you and your offspring to come, all the land of Canaan, as an everlasting holding. So Abraham not only defied centuries of subsequent Jewish business acumen by paying full price, he paid full price for something that in effect was already his, something that had already been assured him by God. That seeming contradiction has been observed for centuries by Jewish commentators. Some see it as practical. Abraham insists on paying full price so that his title to the land could never be disputed. Some see it as a lack of faith by Abraham. He makes sure to acquire the land because he's not quite sure of the promise, so he takes matters into his own hands. Others, of course, say the opposite. Abraham's purchase of the land is the consummate act of faith. He is willing to commit himself as an active partner with God instead of just sitting by passively. In this view, Abraham understands and models for us the fundamental Jewish spiritual understanding that belief does not replace action, belief requires action. Abraham embraces God's promise in all of its inspiration and aspiration, and he understands that the space between a noble promise and its fulfillment is the space of human responsibility. It is true of the promise of covenant in the Torah, and it is true of the promise of America. Our highest values as a nation, the guarantees written into the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, are always somewhere between promise and fulfillment. The compact created by the Constitution is always a work in progress, and the space between promise and fulfillment in the American covenant, as in the biblical covenant, is the space of human responsibility. For us as Jews, one of those most fundamental American promises has been freedom of religion, historically rooted in the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment and the animating principle of the separation of church and state. Those protections have been instrumental to our thriving in many spheres of American life, but they are and have always been works in progress requiring our vigilance, from the right to pray and assemble as we choose, to protection against discrimination in housing, education, and employment, to the right to kosher food in the military, to keeping sectarian prayer out of public schools. Earlier today, that fundamental right to freedom of religion took another hit here in Texas when the Texas State Board of Education voted narrowly, 8-7, to approve Bluebonnet Learning, a set of state-created K-5 public school curriculum materials which include specific reference to religious texts and mention Christian texts more than any other. Proponents of the curriculum argue that it is interdisciplinary. and that Christianity plays a fundamental role in understanding American history and culture. Critics of the curriculum, including our neighbor and friend, religious expert Professor Mark Chancey of SMU, argue that the use of religion in the curriculum is not driven by educational objectives, but by an attempt to insert certain expressions of Christianity into public education. Critics observe that the values that the curriculum teaches do not actually require resort to religious texts. The lessons privilege Christianity as the source of morality, and the lessons often misunderstand the religious texts themselves. Most importantly, the insertion of religion into public school materials for young children undermines church-state separation, and thereby gives to the state far-reaching control over how children learn about religion. Now, I know this might sound weird, a rabbi arguing against the teaching of religion, but of course I'm not. I'm arguing against the teaching of religion in public schools. I'm arguing against a third grader of any faith encountering Judaism for the first time in how it is framed through a particular Christian lens in her public school textbook. I'm arguing, along with other rabbis, that we can handle the teaching of the book of Esther just fine. The Temple Emanu-El is a center for teaching Jewish texts and Jewish values, and we do not need a fourth grade public school curriculum to teach them for us. And I'm arguing along with many Christian ministers who feel the same way about Christian texts and teachings. I am one of many faith leaders who understand how our faith traditions can be distorted when they're extended into the public square without careful consideration. In other words, teaching religion in public schools isn't good for the schools, and it's not good for religion either. It's important to note that the U.S. Supreme Court has ruled that teaching the Bible in public schools is allowed, as long as it doesn't cross into what they call mandatory religious activity. Its defenders claim that Texas's Bluebonnet curriculum uses Bible stories not to teach about religion, but for lessons in art appreciation, math, poetry, and other subjects. But here's what that means, as reported in an excellent and comprehensive article in the foreword. It means that a fifth grade unit on the Renaissance focuses on Da Vinci's portrait of the Last Supper, and the choice of that particular painting becomes a vehicle to teach about Jesus and his disciples. In a unit teaching kindergartners how to place events in chronological order, Bluebonnet uses the story of God establishing the world in 6 days, creating light on the first day and humans on the last, as a sequencing task in a math unit. The curriculum also seems to have a strange fascination with the book of Esther, and originally had a dice rolling exercise in imitation of the dice rolled in the Purim story to determine the fate of the Jews. After loud objection, the dice rolling exercise was removed, but the curriculum still focuses on Esther and Mordecai as symbols of faith in God. Ironic, because the book of Esther is the only book of the Hebrew Bible that doesn't mention God at all. In the words of David Brockman, a religious studies scholar at Rice who reviewed the curriculum, the authors appear to go out of their way to work detailed Bible lessons into the curriculum, even when they are both unnecessary and unwarranted. They look like excuses for the student to do Bible study. And that seems to be the point for many of the curriculum's proponents. The effect of imposing Christian Bible lessons upon public school students is the explicit intent of certain Christian groups, often identified under the umbrella of Christian nationalism, who believe that America was founded upon Christian principles and was always intended to be a Christian nation. For them, the separation of church and state is an overblown and overvalued technicality and is subordinate to the broader goal of Christianizing America. That is why they helped pass a Texas bill that allows for religious chaplains to serve as counselors in public schools, and why they support the placement of the Ten Commandments and potentially more explicitly Christian religious texts in classrooms. And you know, whenever I get to the Ten Commandments in classrooms, I have to quote my teacher, Rabbi David Saperstein, who once famously said, "The Ten Commandments will improve student behavior in classrooms around the same time that the Gideon Bible improves behavior in motel rooms." Before I was going to insert that joke, there was a better transition between these two paragraphs. Here I would say a word about anti-Semitism. Many of us are rightfully concerned about anti-Semitism in our kids' or grandkids' schools. And we have lately been identifying such anti-Semitism either with distorted portrayals of Israel and the Jewish people from the left, or with neo-Nazi activities and memes from the right. But I'll be honest with you. I have a lot more confidence in the capacity of a junior in college or even a junior in high school to think critically about a manipulative TikTok video than I do about a second grader to sort through a public school lesson that teaches the importance of the Sermon on the Mount. Our younger kids are much more vulnerable than our older kids when it comes to potential harm in the educational setting. Curricular materials that presume a certain brand of Christianity as the norm and destiny in America can do as much, if not more, anti-Semitic harm to our kids than more headline-grabbing provocations. It's why I'm so proud that members of our congregation testified in Austin during the hearings phase and entered a statement on behalf of Temple Emanu-El into the record of the deliberations, defending freedom of religion and criticizing the elements of the curriculum which infringe upon it. The State Board of Education did approve the bluebonnet materials today. That chapter is closed. But it's important to note that the curriculum materials are optional, though they come with financial incentives for the districts. Nonetheless, each school district in the state, including DISD, PISD, RISD, and HPISD, will have a choice whether to register for this curriculum. The more local these questions become, the more influence we can have. I've spoken to some experts who think our area districts are already predisposed to reject the bluebonnet materials. I've spoken to others who aren't so sure. That's why Temple, with multiple coalition partners, will be fully engaged in encouraging our local school boards to reject the materials. If you're interested in being part of these efforts, contact Erica Matzel here at Temple and keep your eye on the Temple Responds page on Facebook. I hope our efforts will be effective. But even if we are, there will be other church-state struggles on the horizon, from a push for sectarian prayer and explicit religious symbols in schools to voucher programs that will permit the use of taxpayer dollars to fund specifically religious education. By keeping our public schools free of religious coercion, we have an opportunity to both protect our own rights and defend the American promise of freedom. That inspiring American promise still stands, but it requires our continued investment and commitment to protect and fulfill it. Like Abraham, we should embrace the promise with which you've been blessed. And like Abraham, we should recognize that we have a role in making that promise real in the world for the sake of our Jewish kids, our Jewish families, and the America we call home. Shabbat Shalom.